Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're diving deep into a topic that's both unsettling and heartbreaking, the Highway of Tears. You know, that stretch of road in British Columbia that seems to swallow people whole, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and shattered families. And let me tell you, the stories from this highway, they're the kind that stay with you long after you've heard them. We're talking about vanished hitchhikers, mysterious disappearances, and a body count that just keeps rising. Buckle up, because today we're uncovering 8 things you need to know about the Highway of Tears. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. All right, so first things first, where exactly is this Highway of Tears everyone keeps talking about? Well, it's a 720-kilometre stretch of Highway 16 running through British Columbia, Canada. Sounds innocent enough, right? Wrong. This seemingly ordinary highway cuts through some seriously remote areas, dense forests and isolated Indigenous communities. It's the kind of place where, if something were to happen, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to be caught alone out there. And as if the isolation wasn't creepy enough, the Highway of Tears has earned its chilling nickname for a reason. Since the 1970s, this stretch of road has seen an alarming number of women go missing or turn up dead. Now, you might be thinking, but highways go through remote areas all the time. What makes this one so different? Well, it's the sheer number of cases, the lack of answers, and the chilling similarities between them that make the Highway of Tears truly terrifying. We're talking about women, often young and Indigenous, who vanished without a trace. Some were last seen hitchhiking, others were driving alone, and a few were just passing through. Their stories are all different, yet tragically intertwined by this one lonely highway. And the truly unsettling part, many of these cases remain unsolved, leaving families with more questions than answers and a constant ache in their hearts. It's like the highway itself holds the secrets, and it's in no hurry to give them up. Now, let's talk numbers, because honestly, they're pretty staggering. It's estimated that over 40 women have gone missing or been found murdered along Highway 16 since the 1970s. Can you imagine that? Over 4 decades of fear, grief, and unanswered questions. Some sources even suggest the number could be much higher, but due to inconsistent record-keeping and, let's be real, systemic biases, the true extent of this tragedy remains unknown. And that's just messed up. These women came from all walks of life, each with their own story, their own dreams, their own families who loved them dearly. But they were all united by this one tragic circumstance, forever linked to the Highway of Tears. Some of the cases that have received significant attention include the disappearance of Colleen Macmillan, who vanished while hitchhiking in 1974. Her body was found a year later, but her killer was never brought to justice. Then there's the case of Ramona Wilson, who was just 16 years old when she disappeared in 1994. Her remains were found a year later, and despite numerous leads, her case also went cold. And who could forget Tamara Chipman, a young mother who vanished in 2005, leaving behind a young son. Her disappearance, along with the others, has left a community on edge, haunted by the question of who or what is preying on these vulnerable women. So we've talked about the Highway of Tears and we've talked about the victims, but there's a reason this story is so haunting, and that's because so many of these cases remain unsolved. Can you imagine the families for years wondering what happened? And we're talking decades, people. Decades of missing and murdered women, and for what feels like the longest time, it seemed like no one was listening, like their lives, their disappearances just didn't matter. So where are the police in all of this? Why haven't they been able to catch anyone? Well, it's complicated. This region is vast, remote, and often poorly lit. It's the perfect hunting ground for someone who wants to disappear. There's also been criticism about the initial investigation. Some say the police didn't take these disappearances seriously enough, especially in the beginning. They dismissed some cases as runaways or just chalked it up to the women making bad choices. And that's the thing that gets me, right? It's like they're blaming the victims, as if being a woman traveling alone makes you somehow responsible for your own disappearance. It's just not right. But here's a glimmer of hope, you guys. In recent years, there's been renewed interest in these cases. They've even set up a special task force dedicated to investigating the Highway of Tears. So maybe, just maybe, there's still a chance for justice. Okay, so are you guys ready for our first story? Because I've got chills just thinking about it. This is the story of Sarah, a young woman driving home alone on Highway 16. It was late, the kind of late where the only company you have are the shadows from your headlights dancing on the trees. Sarah was tired, but she had been visiting family and was anxious to get home. She had just taken this same route a few days ago, so it wasn't like she was unfamiliar with the road. It was dark, sure, but she had driven in the dark plenty of times before. Sarah tried to rationalize her fear. She told herself it was just her imagination, that she was just tired and letting her nerves get the best of her. But then she saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, shrouded in shadow. She slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just feet from the figure. Sarah's heart was racing, her breath catching in her throat. She squinted through the windshield, trying to make out what she was seeing. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, a dark silhouette against the night sky. Sarah was frozen in fear, unsure of what to do. Should she honk the horn, try to drive around it, call for help? But before she could make a decision, the figure just vanished. 1 minute it was there, and the next it was gone. Just like that. Sarah was left in stunned silence, her heart still pounding in her chest. She just knew that she had just seen something unexplainable. This next story takes a darker turn, you guys. This one's about Emily, a young college student who was last seen hitchhiking on Highway 16. See, Emily's car had broken down on the side of the road, and being a trusting soul, she accepted a ride from a stranger. It was broad daylight, and there were other cars on the road. Emily probably thought she was safe. She even called her friend from the stranger's car, just to let someone know she was getting a lift. She told her friend where she was, described the car, and even mentioned what the driver looked like. Everything seemed normal. Emily's friend could hear the traffic in the background, could hear Emily laughing at something the driver said. They even made plans to meet up for coffee later that week. It was a normal conversation, until it wasn't. Because mid-sentence, Emily suddenly went silent. Her friend heard a muffled sound like a struggle, and then the line went dead. Emily's friend tried calling back over and over again, but it went straight to voicemail. Emily was gone, vanished without a trace. The police, using Emily's friend's description, located the car Emily was last seen in. The car belonged to a man who lived nearby. He claimed he'd never seen Emily before. The police searched his car, home and the woods, but found nothing. It was like she had just disappeared. The case went cold for years. Emily's family and friends were left with more questions than answers. Our final story brings us back to Highway 16, where the darkness lingers longer and the shadows hold their secrets tighter. It's about a trucker named Jack who encountered something unexplainable on a cold, desolate night. Jack had driven these roads for years, familiar with its twists, turns and desolate stretches. But this night, a figure emerged from the shadows, a lone hitchhiker, thumb outstretched. A young woman, her thumb out, tugged at Jack's heart. Against his better judgment, Jack pulled over. The woman leaned in, her face hidden, and whispered, "Thank you, sir. Could you take me to the next town?" Her voice was soft, but something about it sent chills down Jack's spine. "Sure, hop in," he said, trying to shake the unsettling feeling. Little did he know this act of kindness would lead him down an unimaginable path. As they drove, Jack tried to make small talk, but the woman remained quiet, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Her eyes seemed to reflect the darkness outside, holding a depth that made Jack uneasy. He asked her name, where she was headed, but her answers were vague, almost rehearsed. She didn't have a bag, no purse, nothing to suggest she was travelling. Even with the heater blasting, Jack felt an unnatural chill radiating from her. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Jack pulled over, expecting the woman to hop out, but the passenger seat was empty. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. He scanned the side of the road, but there was nothing. Jack knew he would never forget the chilling encounter with the ghost of Highway 16. Can you imagine living so close to such tragedy and fear? Because that's the reality for the communities along Highway 16. They're living with this constant reminder of the missing and murdered. It's like a dark cloud hanging over them. Many people who live in these communities knew someone who went missing or was murdered. It's personal, you know, and it's terrifying. You go from thinking it's something you only hear about on the news to it being your neighbour, your friend, or even a family member. But you know what? These communities, they're resilient. They haven't let fear paralyse them. Instead, they've come together to support the families of the victims and demand justice. They've organised rallies, marches and vigils to keep the spotlight on these cases and put pressure on the authorities to find answers. They're determined to make sure that their loved ones are not forgotten and that their stories are heard. These communities are also working to make the highways safer. They're pushing for increased police patrols, better lighting and more resources for victims' families. They're determined to turn this highway of tears into a road of hope. It's really inspiring to see how these communities are coming together in the face of such tragedy. They're turning their pain into action, and their voices are making a difference. So, what's being done to solve these cases and bring justice to the families? Well, it's a mixed bag. The RCMP has dedicated task forces and units to investigate the Highway of Tears cases. They've pored over evidence, chased down leads, and interviewed countless people. But it hasn't been easy. Many of these cases are cold, with limited evidence and witnesses. Plus, the vastness of the area and the remoteness of some locations make it incredibly challenging. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the haystack is the size of a small country. The fight for justice doesn't end there. There are amazing organisations and individuals dedicated to bringing awareness to the Highway of Tears tragedies. They're using their platforms to share the stories of the victims, advocate for increased safety measures, and keep the pressure on authorities. One of the things that really breaks my heart is how many of these cases remain unsolved. It's a stark reminder that we need to do better. We need to keep talking about these cases, raising awareness and demanding justice for the victims and their families. The families of the victims deserve closure. They deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. And we, as a society, have a responsibility to help them find the answers they so desperately seek. These cases serve as a chilling reminder that monsters are real and they walk among us. But they also highlight the resilience of the human spirit and the unwavering love of families who refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten. The Highway of Tears remains one of Canada's most haunting mysteries. As we remember the victims and their families, we must continue to seek justice and ensure that no more lives are lost on this dark stretch of road. Stay safe and always be aware of your surroundings.